listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the race is on to appoint the next New South Wales Police Commissioner. But the top candidate has this week been rocked with controversy, including revelations he'd been investigated by the police watchdog. But the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns continues to back Mal Lanyon, saying the New South Wales Police Commissioner does not, quote, need to have a lily-white record. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Friday, the 19th of September. 7 teenagers have been arrested over the stabbing deaths of a 15-year-old and 12-year-old in Melbourne's West. Police say homicide detectives raided several homes this morning. The victims were walking home from a basketball game in Cobblebank on the 6th of September when they were allegedly attacked on separate streets by masked assailants armed with machetes and other long-edged weapons. Police say, quote, a significant investigation remains ongoing and have increased patrols in the area. One of the 2 victims of convicted rapist and former New South Wales MP Gareth Ward has told a court of the devastating mental health issues he has endured since being assaulted more than a decade ago. Ward, 44, was found guilty in July of indecently assaulting an 18-year-old at his Shoalhaven home in 2013 and raping a 24-year-old political staffer at his Potts Point apartment in Sydney in 2015. He met both men through his role as Kiama MP. At Parramatta District Court on Friday, a victim impact statement was read out on behalf of the Shoalhaven victim, who described significant psychological trauma, including major depression, drug and alcohol issues, suicidal thoughts, and recurring flashbacks of the assault. Ward was taken into custody in July after his bail was revoked ahead of sentencing. And 17-year-old running prodigy Gout Gout has narrowly missed a place in the 200-metre final at the World Athletic Championships in Tokyo. Gout Gout finished 4th in his semi with a time of 20.36 seconds. The Sydney teenager is the youngest man in the 200-metre field and the youngest ever selected for Australia's World Championships team. He set the national record of 20.02 seconds earlier this year. Gout Gout says he is thrilled with his latest performance.
It's really good. I mean, semi-finalists and go out there and compete against the big guys. Couldn't be proud of myself for sure.
Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the appointment of the new New South Wales Police Commissioner. There's speculation the government is divided on who to back, with reports this week that top candidate Mal Lanyon was investigated by the police watchdog for taking his wife and another couple on a police vessel while running an on-water command centre on New Year's Eve in 2023. Despite the controversy, the current Deputy Police Commissioner has firmed as a frontrunner for the state's top police job. The Premier says he's willing to overlook bad decisions and that the New South Wales Police Commissioner did not need to have a, quote, lily-white record. It comes at the end of a massive week for the New South Wales government after it passed groundbreaking legislation against sexually explicit deepfakes. The Premier also announced the biggest overhaul of state planning laws in half a century in a bid to try and solve the housing crisis, which could also set a precedent across the country. Joining us to unpack this new legislation and also the controversy surrounding the next New South Wales Police Commissioner is New South Wales Housing Minister Rose Jackson. Minister, thank you so much for your time today. Great news. The New South Wales Labor government has passed legislation this week strengthening protections against image-based abuse by outlawing the creation and sharing of sexually explicit deepfakes. We all know how serious this problem is, especially for so many young people. How will this exactly work?
Well, I mean, it'll operate like any other crime, as it should. We already have long-standing laws around non-consensual image-based abuse, so making or distributing sexually explicit images without someone's consent. That's been a crime in New South Wales for some time. But there was a real loophole for generative AI. It actually wasn't a crime to use some of the new technology that we have in our society to generate very, very realistic. I think anyone who's seen, the technology that we have, how realistic some of these images can be, sexually explicit material and distribute it. We've listened to people, we've listened to DB organisations, we've listened to women who've said, yeah, this is distressing, it's humiliating, we shouldn't be subject to it. So we've closed that loophole.
We all agree it needs to be shut down and this loophole needs to be closed. But exactly how will this be enforced? So if someone is creating this and distributing these fake images created through AI, one, how will they be apprehended and how will this be enforced and them treated as criminals?
Yeah, we have a really comprehensive cybercrime squad within New South Wales Police. And, once a complaint is made that a sexually explicit deep fake is in circulation, someone has that awful experience of seeing an image which looks like themselves, that's horrible, that's sexually explicit. They know that it's been created without their consent. They're able to take that complaint to police. This cybercrime squad really is at the cutting edge of technology. They're able to track IPs, figure out where that image has been generated from, who's been distributing it. And then the police will take those individuals to court through the criminal justice system, and they're liable to imprisonment for up to 3 years and fines of tens of thousands of dollars. So that cybercrime squad at New South Wales Police has got a critical role to play here. And, we really are wanting to make sure that they're properly resourced to do the work that we need them to do. And they are really, I want to assure the community, at the cutting edge in terms of shutting down the use of these new technologies to commit these criminal offences.
What if they're created overseas?
Well, in that instance, obviously, we wouldn't have jurisdiction in relation to the creation of the image. But if it was being distributed in New South Wales, so shared by people here, that will also be a crime, punishable by up to 3 years in prison and massive fines. So, we obviously, as a state, have some limits on our jurisdiction. But anyone in New South Wales who's obviously creating these images, but also receiving them and then sharing them, is committing a criminal offence, and we want to be very, very clear. It's not on it. As I said, it's been against the law for a long time to take images, audio, video of someone without their consent, sexually explicit, and distribute it. Doesn't matter if you're using generative AI to do that. If it is a readily recognisable image of a person, and a reasonable person would recognise that individual from the generative AI, then you're committing an offence and we're going to go after you.
Also in New South Wales this week, which will have massive implications across the country because the housing crisis affects thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of people right across the country. New South Wales has announced a major overhaul, the biggest in half a century, of planning laws. Can you unpack exactly how this will help solve the housing crisis?
Yeah, it is a big reform. And look, as you say, we've heard consistent feedback over many, many years that the New South Wales planning system is Byzantine, it's complicated, it's putting sand in the gears of delivering the housing we need. This is a significant overhaul. There's plenty of elements to it. I suppose the key element that I want to draw out for people is once we set the framework for what kind of housing is deliverable in a community, the height limits, the master planning for a community, what are called complying developments, so developments that comply with that framework, won't need to go through their own individual complicated development application process. And that's a really significant change because we need planning rules, we need clear frameworks, we need to understand what development is going to suit what local community best. But once that's agreed, once that framework is set, individual developments that are consistent with that framework shouldn't be taking months and sometimes years in the planning system. And that's what's happening now. So that complying development expansion is really going to save time and it's going to help us get the housing that we need to confront the housing crisis.
Minister, there has been a lot of concern from a lot of local community groups, including some pretty big Sydney councils, concerned that this gives developers a green light. We all want to solve the housing crisis, but we want to make sure, A, that complying developments are safe, because there's also a big issue with private certifiers. We know many councils and examples right across Sydney where they've been actually structurally unsafe and have caused financial heartache for hundreds of people. How can you guarantee that this will not end up creating really dangerous, non-compliant buildings that will kill cities?
Well, I mean, first of all, because we're also making substantial amendments to the Building Act, which is the framework that manages, as you say, whether or not the buildings that are being delivered in Sydney are safe and structurally sound. And we have a really powerful building commissioner in New South Wales at the moment who goes around site by site to make sure that buildings are being delivered in the right way. So that compliance framework for building, the safety, the structural integrity of our buildings is very, very strong. The changes to the Planning Act sit alongside that. As I said, it's in the name. The development has to be complying. It does have to comply with the framework, the planning framework that we've set, but that doesn't mean that in that framework, every individual house, every individual apartment needs to go through an incredibly long and complicated system, because to be perfectly honest, that's how we've gotten into this problem. That's how we've become the second least affordable city on the planet. And we do have to do something about that. But that building compliance framework is very strong in New South Wales, and as it should be.
And what about infrastructure? Because it's great to have the supply situation sorted, but we know many Sydney councils this week, like councils across the country, have been concerned. That's great. You build all the apartments, all the buildings, but we don't fix the roads or the schools or the local infrastructure.
Yeah, it is a really important point. And we recognise the social licence for delivering more homes is that it sits alongside infrastructure. One thing that we've been very clear is that all of our development frameworks, particularly the big state-led rezonings, sit on transport nodes. That's one of the things we have done from day one, transport-oriented development. So on those metro lines, one that we've done recently is the activation of the Wallara train station, a new train station to sit alongside housing. That's been a critical part of our housing framework. It must sit alongside transport so people can get around. But we also overlay schools, hospital access. That is all part of the integrated planning that we do. Water and sewerage, that's included in the assessments from day one. But the reality is, particularly in some parts of Sydney, we've actually seen declining populations. We've actually seen the depopulation of certain parts of Sydney as the population gets older and young families can't afford to move in. So there actually is latent capacity in some parts of the city. We are really focused on those parts to make sure that every part of Sydney is delivering its fair share.
Minister, another big issue for New South Wales at the moment is appointing the next Police Commissioner. I just want to get your response to New South Wales Premier Chris Minns has made a comment this afternoon saying, quote, he's willing to overlook bad decisions and that the New South Wales Police Commissioner does not need to have, quote, a lily-white record. Shouldn't our next Police Commissioner have the highest of highest ethical standards and records?
Look, I mean, I have to say, I endorse the Premier's view on this. He's leading that process and I have, full faith in the framework that he's applying to that appointment. I think the point he's making is in anyone's life, in anyone's career, there are ups and downs and people make stuff-ups. I mean, I've done that myself. I think every single individual, if they looked back over their life and their career, would recognise moments where, they had a stuff-up or they didn't do something perfectly right. That's the human condition. That's what everyone, I think, would experience. And I think Chris was just making the point that, that same very, very normal approach that we would all have to our own lives, applies to the police commissioner as well. And I think that's a very normal and sensible, view that a lot of people would view as common sense.
An expert in the Wood Royal Commission into the New South Wales Police Forces said today, after the Premier's comments, that the state's top police officer needed to meet the highest ethical standards. This is a person that leads our police force.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't seen those particular comments. Look, I'd agree that, you need to have extremely high ethical standards, the highest ethical standards. I don't think that's what the Premier was saying. I think he was just saying having those incredibly high standards can sit alongside a life and a career where there are ups and downs. You can have very high, the highest ethical standards of integrity and still be a normal human being who has, in their life and in their career, had ups and downs. I don't think those things are actually inconsistent. And I think that's the point that Chris was making. But I do know that in the appointment of the next police commissioner, those very, very high standards are front and centre. And I have full confidence that the Premier and the Police Minister, when they finalise the appointment, will be applying those standards.
Minister, just on that point, there is speculation, and this is speculation, unvalid or unfounded allegations at this stage, that there is tension between the New South Wales Police Commissioner and the Premier over who will be the next Police Commissioner. Who would you back to take that top spot?
Oh, no, I'm not getting in that one. I'm the housing minister. I focused on my role.
I had to ask.
As I said, I know they're working closely together. All that speculation scuttle. But I mean, look, it's an important appointment, so I kind of get that's just, par for the course. But my view is that they're working very closely together, and I have full confidence that they are, really running the fine-tooth comb over it, and that they will have an excellent appointment to announce sometime soon.
So, Minister, finally, you think the right due diligence has been done?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have full confidence in the Premier and the Police Minister on this one. I mean, people have been saying it's been taking some time. I see that. In my view, that's because they're doing that due diligence. They're wanting to get it right, and I applaud that.
I had to ask the question. We appreciate you answering the questions, and thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on this really important legislation.
All good. No worries.
That was New South Wales Housing Minister Rose Jackson. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with the weekend briefing. And on tomorrow's episode, Antoinette is joined by Bohemian Rhapsody actor Gwilym Lee.
The role you played, Ned, was essentially confused white guy in a First Nations mob. How much acting was there?
Yeah, I mean, it's very useful because I can kind of use my own experience of learning these things firsthand as a British actor coming into this community for the first time. It's a useful device because the audience gets to see the world through my eyes in some ways, and I can ask the questions that they want to know the answers to, And maybe being British, it comes across less as a, willful ignorance. It's like it's accepted that maybe I don't know that much about it. Whereas, maybe if it had come from an Australian perspective, it's like, well, you should know that. It's like,
totally.
Yeah.
We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. See you next time.